welcome to Skeptic Smash Talk. Today is Monday the 4th of June, and this is episode 15. I'm your host, Jason Jones. Now, until I get to the end of today's show, I don't actually know how long it's going to be. And, well, I need to spoil the mystery just a little bit and let you peek behind the curtain. So this show's not just about me raging on about whatever comes to mind. I do need to do a little bit of homework and some research and put some notes together. But most importantly, and I think the most time-consuming job of what I need to do to put this show together is a fact-checking, especially given the climate right now. Anyway, what I've done is prepared some stories about Boris Johnson with some predictions about his success at becoming the leader of the Tory party, and a bit about how he would be as a Prime Minister. And after hours and hours of research, and I swear to God, literally as I hit the save button, I read that he is quit. So I turn to Nigel Farage. Now this week he's talked about gun control and taxes and this, that and the other, and how he'll lead his party into the future. And he quit. And then there's a Labour Party. Who knows what's happening there? They have a leader with the strongest support of its actual membership in decades. Yet all of the politicians in the party are calling for a coup. And that's one of the most annoying stories at the moment right now. And for full disclosure, I'm not a Labour supporter at the moment. But when the people have spoken, the politicians are supposed to act. But when even the former leader of the Labour Party, Lord Kinnock, said on the weekend that the mass membership don't actually have a say on how the party runs or who's elected into the leadership position. So between now and when the next big thing happens, who knows? We have to just wait and see. But if we take the numbers from last year's general election results, the three parties that nearly 80% of the voting electorate voted for last year are an utter shambles. So everything may sound a little ramshackle this week, and if it does, you know why. They say a week's a long time in politics. Well, an hour's a long time in podcasting. And while I'm on that, my heartfelt apologies for the last few shows if you felt they've been a little bit politically heavy, but it feels like a lot of the other skeptical type podcasts are not covering any of this, so I decided that I would. So if you're not a fan of the politic, bear with me. Normality will probably resume, well, whatever normality is and whenever it happens. Now, as always, before we go on, please remember this podcast is classified as explicit. So if you are easily offended or think that the far right have interesting suggestions for cohesive living, it's probably best you just turn off now. Also, don't forget you can reach me on Twitter and Facebook, and I'll have all the details in the show notes. And if you want to send me feedback or ask me questions, you can email me at jasonsmashtalk@gmail.com. All the contacts are in the show description, as well as a link to the new, albeit temporary, webpage, as well as a new YouTube channel that will have small clips from the show. If you just search on YouTube for Skeptic Smash, you'll find it there. I'd really love to hear from some of the newer listeners. I would especially like to know how people are finding the show and where they're hearing about this from. And I think the biggest influx of new listeners this week actually comes from Germany, but also other places that I wouldn't have suspected, like Argentina and the Netherlands. So keep listening, keep writing in, and please keep sharing the links with all your friends. And finally, before we go on, if you really want to help me out, please go to iTunes and leave your reviews there. By doing so and by subscribing on iTunes, it helps me build up my Apple profile and lets me rub my shoulders with some of the big boys of podcasting. Anyway, let's get on with the show before all the news changes. So it's been a little more than a week since the UK's population voted to remove itself from the European Union. And it's been a little more than a week of people asking what happens next. More worrying than that is the fallout from the decision. We've had many people now turn to the media saying that they didn't actually want us to leave the EU, but wanted to teach the government a lesson. And the best, or the worst of them all, depending on your philosophical bent, was this one. Now, this was a letter sent in to one of the outer London newspapers, and it's a letter to the editor, and it reads, "Sir, did I want the Leave camp to win? No. I voted Leave because I hoped that a near Brexit would give us extra clout in a subsequent battle to reform a bloated, undemocratic EU. The bookmakers and the pollsters let me down." And that was written by Barry Bond from Essex. And this really sums up the attitude and the apathy of this once great kingdom. Rather than doing a little bit of self-education, he has taken advice from the bookmakers. And I think I've already given away the Twat of the Decade award, but still, Barry Bond can be the runner-up for this one. And there's more and more stories, and we see them on the news every day. And there was a young Polish lad, a teenager, and he said that he would have voted out because life's about risk, or the endless reports of people saying that they thought the Leave campaign was to make everybody that's not British leave the UK. But the worst of them all the fuckbrains that have come out and taken the result of the referendum as some sort of permission to break out of their bigot shells and spread even more hate. Now, let's be clear before I keep going. I'm not suggesting that everybody that voted or supported the Leave campaign are racist, but what I'm saying is that the bigots and the xenophobes in the country now seem to think that 52% of the nation feel the same way as they do and have taken it upon themselves to drag this once Great Britain into the gutter, just leaving us to be now the ugly red-headed freckled stepchild of the rest of Europe. So now, as you would suspect, the bigots are also showing their true intellect. For example, earlier last week, there was an incident on a tram in Manchester. Now, by the way, Manchester voted strongly to remain. But anyway, while on a tram on his way to his job as a lecturer at the Manchester Metro University, this guy was a 7-year US Army veteran, and he challenged a group of young lads that were acting like a bunch of little pricks on the tram. They were annoying people, they were annoying the other passengers and swearing, and this is in the morning, they were drinking. Anyway, the guy challenged them and they started in on him, telling him to get back to Africa and go home, you immigrant, and all that sort of horrible stuff that you hear nowadays. Now, if you do a googly thing on, the guy's name was Jan Jasso, and just Google his name and Manchester and train, you'll see that apart from having black hair, there is nothing else about him that would even suggest that he's any African heritage. Well, apart from, probably 50,000 years ago when we all migrated out of Africa. But my point is, these dickheads saw somebody that looked a little bit different, had a different accent, and that was enough for them to go apeshit. You can even see on the video footage they throw beer at somebody. Unfortunately, the beer goes over a little baby. And because there was decent, and only because there was decent video and thanks to social networks, the 3 maggots were soon arrested and are now on bail, and they'll go to court pretty soon. Can it get worse than that? Well, a halal butcher was burnt down. It was actually firebombed with a Molotov cocktail. People are being assaulted in the streets openly now, and according to the police, domestic assaults have more than tripled immediately after the referendum. And of course, the right-wing fascist groups like Britain First and the EDL are starting to march again. And yes, I can hear you. There are people screaming at me right now that correlation does not mean causation. Well, in this case, it does. The bigots are openly saying that they won and immigrants have to go home. And that's all so many of them think that the referendum was all about. If you don't believe me, just look at the comment section on just about any bloody Facebook post or any YouTube post at the moment. Here's a very small collection of some of the reports that I've seen just today on the social networks. There was somebody saying, just sat with a patient in Macclesfield. She is a PhD and can speak 9 languages. She's already encountered 5 episodes of people telling her to go home. She's actually British and her parents were British diplomats, but she was brought up in Lima, so she has a different accent. She's scared to go into work. Her Polish friends in the Macclesfield community have had their cars sprayed saying go home. This is all happening in Macclesfield and all since the referendum. Another person says, we live next to a daycare centre for disabled adults in Canterbury. Two of the Polish ladies who run it have been abused since the referendum. Another one, pissheads in Tesco was telling an Asian staff member, "We won, we're going to drive you all into the fucking sea soon." So the person yelling at me, is this still nothing to do with the referendum? But wait, this last one's the worst of them all. This person writes, my kids go to, and it's blanked out, school. As we were walking home, little year 5 kids come up to us saying, they voted us out. Why are we still in their country? We should go home. The person says that their 5-year-old sons started crying, saying, do we have to leave our house and move somewhere else? Now, this is going to go on and on. I doubt that it's going to end anytime soon, but quite frankly, I'm getting sick and tired of people trying to argue that this has got nothing to do with the result of the referendum. It's all about the referendum. And I'll say it again. I don't think that 52% of the population are responsible or are encouraging this behaviour. But as it stands, none of them have condemned it. I haven't seen anybody in any leadership position from the Leave campaign denounce or condemn this behaviour. So what else has happened this week? So by now you may have heard that Boris Johnson has hung up his slippers. And to say that that's pissed some people off is an understatement. But there are many that are not surprised. So what actually happened? Well, to get to that, we need to go back to the start of the year. Now, as far as David Cameron and the rest of the kingdom was concerned, Boris was going to be on the side of Remain. That was until he sent a text message to the Prime Minister 9 minutes before announcing to the world that he was going to support and probably lead the Leave campaign. Now, that was a massive stab in the back for the PM, especially as his little lapdog had recently done the exact same thing. And that little lapdog was Michael Gove. And for those who don't know, Gove, for reasons that may come very clear shortly, is junior only to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, he had just laid down the covering fire. It was just a case of et tu, Brutus, or in this case Boris, and the Emperor was full of the figurative knives in his back. Now, when this all happened, I was shocked, but when I think back on it, maybe I shouldn't have been. We all know the game of politics is a nasty one, and so is the game of multinational, multimodal media. So now enter stage left the killer queen, Sarah Vine. Remember the little lapdog? Well, it's not the PM or Boris or the Chancellor that mastered him. It's his wife, Sarah, who once worked for the man that was quoted as saying, when asked why he opposed the EU, replied, when I go to Downing Street, they do what I say. When I go to Brussels, they take no notice. And this is a man that has unlevel control over the media, and no matter who it is in the mainstream media, when Rupert Murdoch says jump, there's an earthquake. And why is this? Well, if they don't work for him now, they either have before or want to work for Rupert the Bear in the future. And they certainly don't want to be on the blacklist. Anyway, long story short, Sarah Vine once worked for Rupert the Bear and now works for the toilet paper also known as the Daily Mail. Right, so let's go to last Wednesday. As it turns out, there was an email that was apparently leaked to the media from Sarah to the little lapdog, and it reads, very important that we focus on the individual obstacles and thoroughly overcome them before moving to the next. I really think Michael needs to have a Henry or a Beth, and they turn out to be Michael Gove's media advisors, with him for this morning's critical meetings. One simple message: you must have specific assurances from Boris, otherwise you cannot guarantee your support. The details can be worked out later on, but without that, you have no leverage. Critically, the membership will not have the necessary reassurance to back Boris. Neither will de Grey/Murdoch, de Grey's the editor of the Daily Mail and obviously Rupert Murdoch, who instinctively dislike Boris but trust your ability enough to support a Boris Gove ticket. She ends with, "Do not concede any ground, be your stubborn best, good luck." Now, apart from the lack of "I love you" or X's and hugs, that email right there says it all. First, she says we get some media advisors so he doesn't say too much stupid things during the press conference, and then get specific assurances. We must have leverage, she says, or no soup for Boris. We all know what leverage means, don't we? But the last bit says just about it all, and it just shows how much power the media moguls have over governments. It says the membership don't like him, and neither does one of the UK's most influential editors, and without doubt the most influential media mogul in the history of the world, don't like Boris, but they'll support him if Gove's on board. What a fucking mess that is. Yeah, and I'm hearing myself, I can hear it, it's borderline conspiracy theory stuff here. But then when you think that this gets leaked and the next day Boris pulls out, to the shock and the honest chagrin of the party members in the crowd, you know there's more going on. Take the two media clowns out of the picture. Boris clearly had the support of the party, then all of a sudden he's out. Now, initially, I thought he had all of a sudden realised that he had the poison chalice now, but he had been vying for the top job for such a long time, and it may just have been that, but come on. For his whole career, he wanted to stand on the shoulders of Churchill. So it makes me want to know what Murdoch has on him. What's the dirt? And don't think they haven't done this in the past. Remember Piggate? No? Probably anyone outside of the UK won't have heard of this, but in brief, last year we all learnt that our Prime Minister, when at Oxford, as was the tradition at the time, put his cock in a dead pig's mouth. And this was all revealed in a book by Lord Ashcroft, a book called Call Me Dave. See if you can guess who run the story first. That's right, it was in the Daily Mail. And that's where Lapdog's handler is a columnist. Now, apparently, there's photographic evidence of all this, and several MPs are well aware of the story. But very soon after it was announced to the world, the story went dead. It went deathly dead. The leader of what was the fifth largest economy fucks a dead pig, and the media is silent. Even Ashcroft and his co-author changed tack, saying perhaps it was a case of mistaken identity. The Prime Minister fucks a pig, and Fleet Street, along with the newspapers known around the world for vomiting stories with vile headlines such as "David Cameron fucks a pig," and they're all silent. How did he manage that? What did the pig fucker offer to have this go deadly quiet? Maybe the story wasn't true in the first place. And if that's the case, where are the retractions? Where's the libel cases? Neither happen. If you're the leader of what was the fifth largest economy on the planet, and someone writes in a book and in the papers that you put your cock in a dead pig's mouth, wouldn't you sue for libel? Or at least a retraction? Or at the very, very least, deny that it happened? None of these occurred. Anyway, nobody really knows the original source or who has the photo. Well, nobody's coming out with that information at the moment. But guess who was at Oxford at the same time as David Cameron? Yep, the one and only Mr. Boris I'm a Quitter Johnson. Okay, now, so it's a fairly big leap into the darkness of the unknown, and there is more chance that I'm completely wrong than right, but after the last week's political three-ring circus, anything can happen. Anything and probably everything will probably come out of the woodwork, and no one can deny the power of the media. So I guess it's a case of watch this space and see what happens. Okay, so what about in not shagging a pig political news? Well, the opposition party aren't immune to the Brexit fallout either. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is facing calls from his party to stand down. And to be honest, most of the Tory party's news has taken over their headlines, so you need to look a lot further into the resources to find any credible information on this now. But if we remember back to when Corbyn was elected by his party to the leadership position in the first place, there were several unhappy campers, and quite a few of the shadow cabinet at the time had either quit or were to be sacked by Corbyn. So he has struggled now to whip his party into line ever since then. But the people that he is actually there to serve, the electorate, are still supporting him. At the moment, anyway. But it seems the media will have their wicked way with him also, with the most stories now talking about how he let his party down with regards to the Remain campaign. Some even going as far as saying that he's secretly pro-Leave. What they are not reporting is that the post-Brexit polls are showing that nearly 70% of the electorate that voted for the Labour Party in the last general election, that was last year, also voted for Remain. In fact, looking at the overall picture of those that voted in both the general election last year and the referendum, 39% of the Remain voters were Labour voters, and only 20% of the Labour voters were on the Leave side. So with that information alone, the picture is quite clear that Corbyn is actually the strongest party leader out of all of them. But there's something else that's going slightly unnoticed, and that's the Scottish National Party. At the moment, they're considered in the House of Commons the third party, and as much as the Conservatives at the moment have a strong majority, they really are a split party, and you can tell in the news, everything I've just said shows that, and their supporters are fed up, especially after the behaviour of the party's supposed leadership this week. And I haven't mentioned the Chancellor of the Exchequer yet, and that is, apart from him now saying that the 2020 budget dreams are no longer valid, in fact, that's all he said in the last week. He's not been seen. So let's lay out the party as it stands so far. This is the party that's leading the nation. We have the Prime Minister. He's quit. We've got the second in command, the second most senior minister, the Chancellor. He's silent and he's said that he's not going to run for the leadership. The third most senior minister didn't attend Parliament, and after the result, knifed Boris in the back. His wife, the Daily Mail columnist, now telling him what to do. And then Boris, who, as far as normal party seniority, doesn't really sit at the round table, but he was picked to be the next leader. He withdraws from the race. So now what? What do you think could happen if the Scots start a full-on alliance with the Labour Party or another party? Well, right now, it will result in nothing more than a hung parliament type situation. But come the next general election, what happens if the SNP start getting candidates in seats from south of the wall? And technically, there's no reason that can't happen. So the result could very likely be a coalition government with the Scottish calling the shots. Now, before you think that's an insane suggestion, think of it like this. When it comes to the rest of the world, nobody really cares that much about the British. Just look at Eurovision. But inside the UK, when it comes to loving thy neighbour, there's a very strong Celtic alliance with the Scots and the Irish. And the Welsh are fed up with being England's stepchild. So it wouldn't take much convincing for 3/4 of the United Kingdom's countries to stand up against English and take control of Parliament. Right, sorry, just to explain that to those that are a little confused by this, Great Britain, or Britain, for simplicity and more accuracy, Britain is the name of the island. The United Kingdom is Britain and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England are all separate countries, currently under the rule of Her Majesty's government in England. So it sounds a little bit Game of Thrones and so far-fetched that it couldn't possibly happen, right? Well, who knows? 2 weeks ago, I would have said all of this is impossible. But who knows? I don't want to make any guesses because every time I look at the news, something new throws a spanner in the works. But that scenario is essentially legally a possibility. But to finish this part off, if you like the Game of Thrones analogy, you'll love how the new leader of the Conservative Party, and therefore the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is to be selected. And I think I mentioned this last week, we the electorate don't get to choose the Prime Minister. The party does. And as it stands right now, right at this very second, I'm so scared to look at the news because this is going to change, there are 5 candidates. Now, each week or so between now and until the leader is announced, the party will remove a candidate from the competition until the winner is announced. Now, I'm not too sure if they'll have to perform some particular talent, or they'll be locked up in the house alone, away from the population, or maybe it will be judged on their cake baking skills. But I have heard rumours that will.i.am and Kylie Minogue have both been seen in London. Right, so let's leave politics alone for a little while. I want to talk about this next story. It's been going around for some weeks now, and I didn't want to really comment on it until I was able to find out a little bit more. And this is about the fruit-flavoured ADHD medication for kids. Now, as it turns out, it's not a new medication per se, but a new delivery system and it's a dissolvable tablet that is aimed at kids to try and encourage them to take their medication. And it seems that there are quite a few people that have a problem with this, in some parts including me. But this is not for the reasons that everybody else has. So, generally, the negative opinions on this drug are in relation to giving drugs amphetamines or stimulants in the first place. And if you hadn't guessed, generally the negative opinions on this drug are by people that don't have kids with ADHD, or for the most part, just dumbass opinion columnists that find it easier to cut and paste press releases than do any real journalism. But, believe it or not, I don't completely disagree with them. As an advocate for the treatment of kids with ADHD, I know some people may find it strange that I have this opinion, but I do think that meds should be held off for as long as possible. Not held back completely, mind you, just held off. Now, I've said this in the past. Now, I did a diatribe on me taking medication a few episodes back. If you go to episode 9, you'll hear all about that. But what we need to do is help kids with ADHD, help them with non-medication techniques for times when they can't take medication or when they need a break from medication. Now, I'm not saying for one moment that these techniques can ever fully take the place of medication, but there are times when it can be an option and can help. The other real problem that I have with this new pill is that it's really just a marketing ploy. There's nothing new about it. It's not a new drug. It's part modified, part immediate release, and I'm not too sure if this is a first or not. If it is, I do like that part of it, but to make it fruit flavoured is just marketing bullshit. Now, a part of their marketing is that the normal medications taste bitter. I agree with that. And if you ever have a tablet get stuck halfway down and it dissolves in your throat and you've got that taste in your mouth for ages, it's awful. But when you look at nearly all the modified release stimulants, that they are in capsule form, not tablet. So there's no taste. And if the kid has problems taking capsules, they can be opened up and mixed in with some honey. Again, I think that's a last case option as well. And this sounds harsh, but the kids are going to be taking their medication for a long time. In some cases, for the rest of their life. So they need to get used to taking it, or you're just going to struggle all the way through. But let's just go back a bit to not having the kids on meds all the time. As you know, I hate taking my meds. I hate the way it feels coming on and off, and in the middle I feel like 90% of me is all tied up. Medicated Jason fits perfectly into your world, but in Jason's unmedicated world, things are very, very different. And while productivity and attention is down, frustration and temper and social inappropriate is up, the positive traits are also up, like creativity and hyper-focus, ingenuity, spontaneity, compassion, persistence. Let's face it, these are the things that make it special. So let's not remove them completely from kids. You wouldn't lobotomize a kid, so why would you constantly medicate them? Anyway, for the last 30 or 40 years, medicating ADHD kids has been a controversial subject. All I ask is that if you're not an ADHD parent or have not been through this yourself, don't talk about what you don't know about in the comment section of a news site. Don't pretend you're an expert on Mumsnet because you know somebody that had a kid with similar symptoms once. And most importantly, don't judge somebody or make judgments on the parents that have to make these decisions about their children and how they are medicated. It's hard enough without the pressure from the keyboard experts. Give the parents a break. Okay, so here's another story that got lost amongst the Brexit headlines, and it's all about my very good friend and apparent listener of this podcast. And like I said, this was hidden away in most of the main news feeds, and it reads, Pope Francis has said that the Roman Catholic Church owes gay people an apology for the way it has treated them. The pontiff recalled Christian teaching and said, I will repeat what the Catechism of the Church says, that they, meaning the gay people I expect, should not be discriminated against and should be respected. Goes on to say, Pope Francis has also told reporters that the institution should seek forgiveness from other groups it had discriminated against. He said, I think the church not only should apologise to a gay person whom it offended, but must also apologise to the poor as well, to the women who have been exploited, to children who have been exploited to work. It must also apologise for having blessed so many weapons. And yet, while the Popiness maintains being gay is not wrong, he has said performing homosexual acts is still sinful. Okay, let's take this as it reads. The Pope, the guy that is God's voice on earth, the one that believes that what he holds true on earth, God will hold in heaven. Yeah, that's the guy. Well, if you believe all of this nonsense, he's the guy that could actually, with his own words alone, either immediately prove or disprove the existence of God herself. He is saying that the church owes the LGBT community an apology. Oh, fuck. No, you fucking moron. You are the church. You, according to your own doctrine, you are the church. These words need to come out of your mouth. And while we're at it, rather than say the church needs to apologise for this and the treatment of the women and the children, etc., why don't you just come out and fucking condemn it and the perpetrators, especially the ones that are holding the highest offices in the Vatican? You know, like your best mate, George fucking Pell, and apologising for blessing weapons. Well, that's a start. What about condemning anybody and everyone that proclaims themselves to be a Catholic but yet still uses a weapon? Isn't that one of your 10 commandments? Thou shalt not kill? Or is it thou shalt not kill unless you pray to your God first and hopefully get there before the other guy does? Because it's first in, best fucking dressed on the battlefield. While you're at it, why don't you de-saint all the saints that use weapons that the church and its bishops and its cardinals and past popes have blessed? How many of your saints have killed? Now, until you do this, your popiness, you are just vomiting words. In fact, you're sounding more and more like a politician. And I tell you what, if it doesn't work out for you in Rome, the Conservatives need a new boss. They tend to like people that talk out their arse as well. Well, that's going to be a little bit awkward though, isn't it? I forgot about the whole Church of England thing. Remember that? Well, there was some holy wars over that too, wasn't there? So you can't come over here. So why don't you talk to your boss and get all the killing and all the bigotry and all the hate on the planet to stop? You're telling us you have the power to do that. That's your dogma, right? Well, fucking do it. How is it that people still can believe in this nonsense? So this is another story that's been floating around for a little while, about a week or so actually, but I wanted to look a little bit further into it before I started commenting. So most of the headlines were the same, practically anyway, essentially stating that scientists have linked paracetamol use with either autism or ADHD, and in some stories, both. So I guess if you've been listening to this show for more than one episode, you will have come to expect that things aren't as simple as that, or else I would probably not even be talking about it right now. So what's in the story? Well, the actual story is that the experts have got together and dismissed the claims that was published in the Journal of Epidemiology that said that it had found a link, between young boys that had been persistently exposed to paracetamol in the womb and higher risks of autism. So the director of science at the autism charity Autistica, and I'm sure I've talked about them before, and that's Dr. James Cusack, insisted that there was not sufficient evidence to back the suggestion. He said that the paper does not provide sufficient evidence to support the claim that there's a strong association between paracetamol and the presentation of symptoms of autism. He says that the results presented are preliminary in their nature and should not concern families or pregnant women. The initial findings were collected when researchers in Spain recruited 2,644 mother-child pairs in a birth cohort study during pregnancy and questioned the mothers about their paracetamol use while pregnant. According to the findings, when assessed at age 5, exposed children were at higher risk of hyperactivity or impulsivity symptoms. Now, I, and others for that matter, have talked and blogged about self-reporting studies and past history recollection before. One of the problems I have is that it does not mention when the information was collected by the parent, but Cusack says that the exact dose could not be noted due to the mothers being unable to recall them exactly, which experts say makes the claims insignificant. So what could have actually happened here is that one of the researchers brings in a new hypothesis and the subjects need to go back and try and remember. And as you can imagine, this is full of dangers. If you have a Google about for information on memory studies, actually look for the Bugs Bunny effect. There's a brilliant study where a group of people are convinced that they saw Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, and they even remember and swear blind to having photos taken with the Wascally Wabbit. But being that Bugs Bunny isn't a Disney character, this shows and is brilliant proof of how malleable the mind is. Anyway, the authors conclude, as they generally always do with such poorly conducted trials, is that more research is needed. But Dr. Cusack kindly adds that more research with carefully controlled for other factors is needed. He also added that there had been an array of environmental factors which have been associated with autism only to be rejected later, emphasising the importance of collecting sufficient evidence before making such claims. What actually surprises me is that after the horrific consequences of the not Dr. Andrew Wakefield's fraudulent activities on the environmental and chemical autism links, that press agencies are still so quick on printing these stories. And stories is an overstatement. What these are is nothing more than a very poor press release that has been let out to the media before they talk to the actual experts in the field. Thankfully, this hasn't done too much damage, if any at all, but it is a reminder of us all to be careful in what we read and to make sure we look for different sources before reporting on it. Okay, so it's time now just for some quickfire news, and for the first story, quickfire is an apt analogy. The headlines read, "Dozens burned during Tony Robbins' motivational exercise." So, if you don't know who Tony Robbins is, he's the motivational speaker who looks like a walking, talking Easter Island head. You know who I'm talking about now? Anyway, at his seminars, participants were hoping to conquer their fears by walking over a bed of hot coal. Now, do you know why humans fear walking over hot coals? Because they're bloody hot coals. That aside, the walking over hot coals thing is a bit of a stage magic trick anyway. The reason people can do this, well, except for this cohort anyway, is that normally, not actually, is it coal. Rather, it's charcoals that have all but burnt out. The real magic is in the heat conduction properties of charcoals or whatever they're using to burn. So combining the heat conductivity or lack of it for whatever the material is, plus the fact that it's covered in ash, essentially the conductivity is really, really low. And it's low enough that this won't burn the skin if you move over it fast enough. And you don't really need to tell anyone doing such a ridiculous activity as walking over hot coals to walk fast anyway. Natural selection should take care of that. But sometimes 1 or 2 or 12 get through the selection process, as it was in this case with this lot. As it turns out, several of the injured decided to stop and take selfies as they were doing the fire walk. Anyway, Jennifer Connolly, no, not that one, I don't think, a spokeswoman for Robbins, said that 7,000 attendees at the Unleash Your Power Within seminar successfully walked across the coals. She adds that it's been a celebrated part of the event for 35 years. The walk typically causes fewer than 1% of participants to experience hotspots. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that sounds like about 70 people experience these so-called hotspots, which, she says, are similar to sunburn, which can be treated with aloe. Connolly goes on to suggest there was no need for emergency personnel. Someone not familiar with the process of the firewalk called 911, reporting the need for emergency service vehicles to be dispatched. While there was no need for emergency personnel, we are grateful to the quick and robust response from the Dallas Emergency Services, she said. She went on to say that only 5 of the 7,000 participants requested any examination beyond what was readily available on site. Except for that, when we talk to the Portland Herald, they tell us that 30 people were treated by paramedics and 5 taken to hospital. So, nice use of words there. Anyway, a fire department representative said that from the fire department's perspective, coal walking is something we don't encourage or condone under any circumstances. However, he says, we have a duty to service those in need regardless of whether we condone their actions, and that's what we did. Right, so I think what concerns me the most about this is the participants in these sorts of things normally fairly intelligent or supposedly intelligent people. The demographics of the crowds that go to these types of seminars are normally from the business world, as you can imagine. It's the up-and-comers or the wannabe up-and-comers, and they have to be because the tickets for these events top out at $3,000. And, okay, that's for the best seats. You can get the cheap ones for $650, which leads me to what really gets me about these sorts of things. The type of people that attend this type of event also spend a shitload of money on self-help books. Now, if these books actually worked, if a book could help you unleash your potential, wouldn't you only ever need just one book? Wouldn't you only ever need to attend just one seminar? No, because these things are no better than a religious experience. You get into the hype, you feel the power from such a massive audience, and that's why the seats in the center of the arena are $3,000 compared to $650 for the ones at the back. The energy of characters like Tony Robbins, all of that combined, and you get swept away, and you think it's made a difference. But think about it. If you're successful, or the mere fact that you've taken the initiative to find ways of unleashing your strength, does that not already mean that you are successful in the first place? Why do you need to pay someone $3,000 to tell you what I've just told you for free? So this next story had a bit of a twist that I wasn't expecting. The story starts out with the headline saying Stephen Hawking says pollution and stupidity still the biggest threats to mankind. And the story is in the Independent and the BBC and everywhere, actually. But it says, Professor Stephen Hawking says he believes pollution and human stupidity remain the biggest threats to mankind, while also expressing his concerns over the use of artificial intelligence. The world's leading theoretical physicist argued we have certainly not become less greedy or less stupid in our treatment of the environment over the past decade during an interview on the Larry King Now show. Professor Hawking said that 6 years ago, I was warning about pollution and overcrowding, and they have gotten worse since then. The population has grown by 500 million since our last interview, he said. He says at this rate it will be 11 billion by the year 2100. Air pollution has increased by 8% over the past 5 years, and more than 80% of inhabitants of urban areas are exposed to unsafe levels of air pollution. He then went on to talk about his concerns about the future of artificial intelligent technologies and specifically their primary use in weaponry. He said governments seem to be engaged in a AI arms race, designing planes and weapons with intelligent technologies. The funding for projects directly beneficial to the human race, such as improved medical screening, seems a somewhat lower priority. But that's not all in Hawking's news this week. The next headline reads, a woman is arrested after Professor Stephen Hawking receives death threats. What? Yep. So, a 41-year-old American woman has been arrested in Spain after physicist Professor Stephen Hawking allegedly received death threats. Now, at this talk, where he was talking about AI and increased populations, it turns out he was escorted around the conference by armed police guards. He said that he had received hundreds of unpleasant messages on Twitter and email spanning several years. However, after he arrived in Tenerife, he received dozens of messages in a few hours, including one that said, I'm next to you, I can kill you. Now you know we're really living inside the Matrix when Professor Hawkins needs armed guards. It's early days in this story, yeah, but you know it's going to come out that one of these nuts thinks that Hawkins was sent back in time or that they've been sent back to kill him or some fucking other wackadoo bullshit. Apart from all that, he's right. Of course he's right. He's Stephen bloody Hawking. The population is spiralling out of control. And unfortunately, that's what populations are designed to do. Well, the ones that don't go into the opposite direction, we have mass extinctions, and we don't want one of those just yet. But for some reason, everybody is frightened to talk about the E word, eugenics. You say eugenics and people's heads explode, but maybe that's what's needed. I have a suggestion that everybody will hate, but it will work. And we can sort out the population problem and stupidity in one foul swoop. How about we give all boys at a certain age, or whenever it's medically possible, some sort of chemical vasectomy, and don't reverse the procedure until they hit a certain age and also have hit a certain minimum IQ level. We can let the women set their selection criteria for the rest of it, and we all know that the women are much smarter than men anyway. And let's face it, the men have been in charge for the past 2,000 years or so and pretty much achieved fuck all, apart from wars and destruction and Justin Bieber and Donald Trump. So maybe we're onto something. One more thing before you all go apeshit and your heads explodes. No, I really don't mean any of this. I don't think we need to do this. Or do I? Okay, to finish this one off, stop sending me hate mail. I was only joking. And to the dumbasses sending the hate mail and the death threats to Professor Hawking, stop it. He's not the Terminator. He's in a wheelchair. Okay, so before I close out the show today, I decided I was going to have a little bit of fun, but at the same time, start putting a little bit of structure into the show. And what do I mean by that? Now, well, if you listen to other such podcasts as The Scathing Atheist, which you really should, or Thomas in the Bible, or My Book of Mormon, you'll know that each week they're doing a reading of part of a different religious book and examining that book in each episode, which obviously I think is a pretty good way of understanding these books. Now, I mean, as an atheist, it's a way of actually understanding what's in these books, but not in a way that makes it feel like it's prophesizing. Anyway, to the point, if you haven't listened to the Cognitive Dissonance podcast, you should. But if you haven't, which we've just all agreed that you should, at the end of each episode, you'll hear what's called the Skeptic's Creed, which is a poem written by Tom, one of the hosts. So anyway, as we know, all us ADHDers get fuck all done without a list. And just as it happens, we as Bergerers love anything written in an orderly double-spaced list form order. So I decided, obviously with grace and permission, to take a line from the Skeptic's Creed each week and try and analyse and explain the meaning and the topics as we go along. But before we do that, let me just play you the Skeptic's Creed now so you know what I'm actually on about, or else none of this will make any sense at all.
Credulity is not a virtue. It's fortune cookie cutter, mommy issue, hypno-Babylon bullshit. Couched in scientician, double bubble, toil and trouble, pseudo quasi alternative, acupunctuating, pressurized, stereogram, pyramidal, free energy healing, watered downward spiral, brain dead pan sales pitch, late night info docutainment. Leo, Pisces, cancer cures, detox, reflex, foot massage, death and towers, tarot cards, psychic healing, crystal balls, Bigfoot, Yeti, aliens, churches, mosques and synagogues, temples, dragons, giant worms, Atlantis, dolphins, truthers, birthers, witches, wizards, vaccine nuts, shaman healers, evangelists, conspiracy, doublespeak, stigmata, nonsense. Expose your sides. Thrust your hands, bloody, evidential, conclusive. Doubt even this.
So let's just take that very first line then. Credulity is not a virtue. What does credulity actually mean? Well, I guess the easiest explanation is that it's a willingness to believe in something or someone without any reasonable proof. But credulity, or being credulous, does not simply mean you believe in something that is false. You can believe in something that's absolutely true or correct, but a credulous person will believe it without having any good evidence, or still believe in the thing once the evidence has changed. So for a simple example, let's say I had always believed that the Earth was a spherical shape. If I was just to accept that, even though it is true, just accepting this as a fact without looking for empirical evidence makes me just as credulous as accepting that a Palestinian carpenter once fell out of a virgin's uterus and then spent a few years wandering around the desert until he was eventually put up a flagpole while everybody around him sang "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." One of these statements is absolute fact and well and truly proven using the scientific method. The other, well, maybe not so much. But this does not mean you should not believe anything at all, or you'll just become incredulous. So the antonym of credulity is not incredulity, rather it's skepticism. But what does that actually mean? Well, if we can quote Stephen Novella, he says, "A skeptic is one who prefers beliefs and conclusions that are reliable and valid to ones that are comforting or convenient, and therefore rigorously and openly applies the methods of science and reason to all empirical claims, especially their own. A skeptic provisionally proportions acceptance of any claim to valid logic and a fair and thorough assessment of available evidence, and studies the pitfalls of human reason and the mechanisms of deception so as to avoid being deceived by others or themselves." And he concludes with, "Skepticism values methods over any particular conclusion." Okay, so there's a lot there, and I had to go back a few times and reread that when I first saw it myself. So if you have to play this part back over a few times, do so. But what Novella is saying there, or the way I've interpreted it, is that you can't just go to the easy answer or the answer that you're looking for or the answer that makes you feel the best. You have to apply logic and an assessment. More importantly, you need to be aware of the fallibility of the human mind or the human brain, as we are all so very easily deceived. But don't confuse skepticism with cynicism. In naming their organisation, the Skeptic Society said that some people believe that skepticism is the rejection of new ideas, or worse, they confuse skeptic with cynic, and they think that skeptics are a bunch of grumpy curmudgeons unwilling to accept any claim that challenges the status quo. This is wrong. Skepticism is a provisional approach to claims. They say that it is the application of reason to any and all ideas. No sacred cows are allowed. In other words, skepticism is a method, not a position. Ideally, skeptics do not go into an investigation closed to the possibility that a phenomenon might be real or that the claim might be true. When we say we are skeptical, we mean we must see compelling evidence before we believe. And the most important lesson in all of this is as the empirical evidence changes, you have to change your position to match the evidence. Remember, there are no sacred cows allowed. Skepticism is a method, not a position. And most importantly, credulity is not a virtue. Okay, well, that's it for me for today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget you can follow me on the Twitter and the Facebook. The links are in the show notes. And don't forget you can support me by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes and by sharing this with your friends. If you're not a fan of iTunes, you can also find me now on Stitcher and Google Music Play or direct downloads from SoundCloud. Thank you, and I will see you next time.